Welcome to Silhouette 101, the Silhouette and Roto course. My name is Katie Morris, and I'm a roto and paint artist with over 25 years' experience in the visual effects film industry. I have 8 classes for you here, starting with some fundamentals and then working my way through the course with increasingly more complex shots and methodologies. I'm happy to present this class using Silhouette. This industry standard software showcases an extremely comprehensive roto module and provides artists with innovative features and tools for efficient workflows so they can create beautiful and sophisticated roto. And in addition, I will be showing a couple ways to incorporate the Mocha Pro plugin into your shot work. As of note, I'm using Silhouette version 2020.5.5 and Mocha Pro version 7.5.1. In addition to footage being provided, I'm also including completed Silhouette project files. It's amazing to think that rotoscoping was pioneered in 1917 and is still one of the essential building blocks for visual effects and media creation. So here we are over 100 years later. Let's get started and I'll take you through my class slides. Class 1 is comprised of a multifaceted foundations class where I will go over matte types, spline types, and shape types. This includes detailed instruction on shape creation using the different spline types. I've also included a Silhouette and Roto compatibility chart where you can cross-reference Silhouette and spline types with other software programs. Class 2 is an in-depth introduction to the Silhouette interface as well as a section on shot approach and how to make a roto plan when you're starting a new shot. I will also open up the user guide so you can start familiarizing yourself with it. It's rich with over 950 pages of instructions, step-by-step tutorials, and a well-indexed appendix. But don't print it out, it would be almost 4 inches tall. Class 3 is rotoing organic shapes and exploring the roto node. I will start building upon our knowledge as I talk about the roto node in relation to a shot that we are working on. And I'm also including some other things in there too. You can see there's a lot of things on the left side there that I'm going to be going over. Class 4 is rotoing organic shapes with tracking, where I will be using tracking to help roto a person. I will also showcase how to roto in the stabilized view and how to think about keyframing on top of tracked layers. And Class 5 is hard surface roto with tracking, where I will roto this very jittery piece of footage of the Empire State Building in New York City. It's definitely going to be a track fest for sure. Class 6 is where I will incorporate the Mocha Pro plugin into my workflow. I have a couple shots for this class. The first one here will use the plugin to help with tracking, and I will show you how to get your Mocha tracks and roto back to Silhouette. The second one here will use the lens undistort and distort modules in the Mocha Pro plugin, and I will show you how to undistort your shot in Mocha. The roto and paint work will be done back in Silhouette on that plate, and then redistorted with the paint intact and Roto Alpha mats embedded. Class 7 will be a shot on how to do hair roto with closed and open shapes. Lots of them. Then I also included a little instruction on how to use your shapes as a mask for painting, while demonstrating that using a hidden cursor. It's one of my favorite things. Lastly is Class 8, a little tutorial on how to use custom Python scripts in Silhouette. I have slides for that class that provide detailed step-by-step instruction. I hope you enjoy the course. Welcome to this Roto Fundamentals class. I will discuss the different types of mats that are generally needed for the compositing process, some Silhouette shape fundamentals, and demonstrate various spline types such as B-spline, X-spline, Bezier, magnetic freehand shapes, and open shapes. The demo should illustrate their differences and help one become more familiar with each type. So I know for many of you, some of this may be obvious as you've been working in the industry, but I feel it's important to make sure that we are all on the same page with terms and procedures before diving into more specifics. I always find that I learn something new when working with other artists, even if it seems basic in nature. So whether you're just starting out or have years of experience, I hope you'll appreciate this class, which will work through terms and concepts we'll be using later. And in this course, we will be focusing on the kinds of mats that are needed for compositing that are created by rotoscoping. So let's start with the different mat types. There are certain mat types, also referred to as masks, that are typically requested. They are articulates, garbage mats, or otherwise known as G mats, helper mats, or sometimes known as core mats. So articulate mats are roto shapes that define the edges of an object in great detail. And we'll just zoom in here. So these are used for precise integration with other elements. One can have multiple individual shapes that make up a single object, and the best practice is to separate them into different shapes in relation to how they move in terms of translation, scale, and rotation from each other. And this practice allows for easier animating of smaller shapes or smaller groups of points as opposed to animating an entire object as one entire shape for each keyframe, thus reducing the chance for problems or errors down the line. So you can see here, I have broken up this object, this creature, into different shapes. So in my layer is my object, and here are all the different shapes that make up the object. And the same with these other objects in this image. I have the seaweed down here. So this layer contains all the different shapes for this area and this object. And the same with this sea plant. You can see I've separated out all the different leaves because most likely they will be moving independently from each other. And next we'll talk about garbage mats. So garbage mats or GMATs are requested to use to roughly isolate an area and are useful for aiding in extractions and keying. So one makes a rough shape around their objects they needed for compositing, thus eliminating the garbage on the outside. And then we have helper mats or core mats. So core mats are used as helper mats for extractions. One makes an interior shape on their object and thus fills in holes or gray areas that are interfering with isolating the object. And this way, the core is protected. So before we move on to additional information about shapes and spline types, I just want to talk about things to think about after you decided what kind of mats you need to make. You need to decide on your spline type. And so there's several factors that you want to think about, such as workflow requirements, end use, and software compatibility, and personal preference. You want to think about, are you going to be using them in Silhouette? Are you going to be exporting the splines to another user? Are you rendering the mats? Are you handing off your Silhouette project? Or are you exporting for use in an external software program, or several of the above? So those are things to think about when you're choosing your spline type. Okay, next I will show you a different session within my project. So here I have a shot, which is where I've made articulate mats. And then I'll cycle through the alpha overlay and turn this off, maybe zoom in a little bit, and play through the shot. Go back to the RGB and zoom out. Okay, so here you can see I've broken up the objects in my shot into different layers. And within those layers, I have different shapes for those objects. So I have the torso, and I have the shorts. I have the helmet down here. You can see I have closed shapes in this shot, and I also have open shapes, which are the spokes down here. Okay, and now I'm going to go to a different roto node here just to show you some shape basics, and we'll go over some of this throughout the whole course, but just a few shape basics for Silhouette. So you can break shapes. We'll show you how to do that. Okay, I'm going to go to my arm frame here. So say if I have this shape here and I want to break it into two parts, I no longer want this to be one shape. I want to break this object up into maybe the hand and the arm, the rest of the arm. What you can do is you can select a point here, and you can right click and you select break, and you select a point here, right click, break, and now you can see, I'll zoom in. Hold on one moment there. So the point was on top of each other. So now I have two broken shapes. Right now there are two open shapes here, and maybe I want to add a few points. Hold down the Alt key, add the points, and now I can close my shape. And then now you see it's closed. And then I can do the same with this shape as well. Maybe I'm going to add a few points. close my shape there. And now you can see I have two shapes. Okay, now I'll show you how you can extract a shape. And I will turn on my arm copy down here. Unlock it first. Okay. All right. So to extract a shape, I want to select the points that I want to extract. They have to be at least 3 shapes or 3 points. And then right click and extract shape. And now you can see I have a new shape that was made here. And that's kind of like the forearm. And then I have a new shape there. And then the original point, the points that are left, these points are just extracted from the original shape. And then you can also join 2 open shapes. So we'll do that right here. I'll make 2 open shapes. So what you do is you select both shapes inside the object list window and you shift, click, hold down the Alt key, and now you can see I have the circle and that's closed there. And I hold down Shift, I select another point here, hold down the Alt key, and you can see I have the circle there. And now I've joined 2 open shapes. Okay, another thing I want to talk about is ensuring that all of your shapes have the proper motion blur. So mostly in terms like the first frame or the last frame. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to turn off these shapes. I'm going to go to my first frame. I'm going to make a new shape. And then I'm going to go to my last frame. I'm going to take this out of that layer. And then I'm going to go to my last frame and I'm going to drag my shape over to the other side of the frame. We'll zoom out. Okay, then I'll turn on motion blur for this shape, and also in the node window, it's turned on already. So we're going to go to like a middle frame and we're going to look at the motion blur, and I'll turn off the shape. So you can see if it's a nice motion blur here. But if I go to the last frame, you can see it doesn't quite look correct. So if I go back 1 frame and then the last frame of my shot, my shape's not going to have motion blur, but you can fix that by adding an extra frame at the beginning or the end, depending on where you want the motion blur. So here I will change this last frame to 1 more frame. So I've temporarily added an extra frame, and then I'm going to move my shape where I think it needs to go to give it some proper motion blur. Actually, I have to go to the next frame, and then I'm going to move my shape here. And then I'm going to go make my last frame again what it really is, or take away the temporary frame and go back to the last frame of the shot, which is 45. And now you can see that I have the proper motion blur on the last frame. And then to move keyframes, you can select them down here in the timeline window and just drag them where you want them to go. And now we'll talk about importing and exporting shapes and rendering. Okay. So for silhouette, I'll just go to the menu up here. You can import these kinds of spline shape types, spline types, media, commotion shapes, elastic reality, SSF, and silhouette shapes. And you can export elastic reality, fusion, Gmask, Nuke 5, 6.2, 9, SSF, and silhouette shapes. So, and then you have several different rendering options. You can actually render your shapes to channels, and that's what I've done here. So for example, I've assigned different shapes two different objects or shapes to a different color or different channel, actually, I should say. I'll bring this up here. So if I'm on this torso layer here, and I'm in the node menu here. Oh, yeah, actually I need to be in the object window here. So I'm selected on my layer, and then I can choose down here in the channel. It defaults to alpha because you can render your maps obviously to the alpha channel or the other channels. But I'm going to choose this layer. I'm going to make that red. I'm going to go to the shorts layer, and I've made that green. And I'm going to go to the helmet, and I have selected blue for that. So now you can see that I have those layers in the different channeled as colored. If I cycle through the alpha, you can see that these shapes are assigned just to straight alpha, and then the other ones are assigned to the different channels. And here is the rendered output of that. So that could be helpful if you wanted to have those separated out like that. If I click on Alt-R, which is the red channel, you can see I have the torso. If I click on Alt-B, which is the B channel, that's the helmet. And Alt-G are the shorts, is the green. And then the alpha channel has the rest of the mats. So another way you can render out your work, and this is probably good for doing a little quality assurance here, is I have all my roto shapes here. And you can assign an outline. You can render out your roto as outlines, or you can have them filled with an opacity, or both. So what I've done here is you go down and you select your shapes. So, and the outline is going to be the color of the spline. So, and the filled interior. So here I have my shapes here are red. The outline is red, and down here I'll go to the node layer. So what I can choose here, if I want to render them out with an outline, so I know in the node parameters window, in the color parameter, I click enable, and now you can choose the outline size that you want. The max is 3, so you can see that. Maybe I'll just go for 2 right now, and then I can change this opacity. We'll go for 50%, and now you can see that I've changed everything to 50%. So that's a way, if you want to render it out that way, to double check your work. And here is the rendered output of that. So there's lots of different ways to render out your work, to check it or to give it to other users. Lots of flexibility for sure. Okay, so now that we've talked about the different mat types and some of the shape basics and some of the importing and exporting and rendering, we can move on to the spline type fundamentals part of this class. So I want to continue on there shortly. Here I have a graphic of various shapes. In my trees window, I have my source node with the roto node attached to it. When it is selected, the roto object list appears in the panel that shares the trees window, and this is specific to the streamlined workspace. And the roto toolbar appears on the left side of the viewer. The top 2 icons are editing tools, the middle 7 are shape and spline tools, and the bottom is the tracker, the multi-frame tool, and the roto overlay tool. And these will be gone over in subsequent classes. Okay, I will make a layer inside my object list, and I will call this demo shapes. I'll zoom in to the boxes here, and we'll start making a B-spline. I'll click on the B-spline icon, or B for the hotkey, and I'll start making my shape. B-splines are determined by how many points there are on the shape and how close they are to each other, and also the control point tension type. So you can see there are 3 different tension types for the control points. There's B-spline, and there's corner, soft corner, and then there's a sharp corner. So I'm clicking Alt and I can toggle in between the tensions, or I can select the control point, hold down the Alt key and do some dragging. And that's a variable tension in between the presets. So in this case, I'm trying to make a shape with all corners, and I can just select all the points with Alt Shift A, and I can right click as well and choose corner. And then I can move my points into place. If I have an extra point I don't need, I can just delete it. If I find that I deleted too many points, I need to add a point, click Alt and add it. I need to change the tension, choose Alt again, and cycle through the presets. And there we have our boxes made with the B-spline shape. And now we'll move on to the X-spline. So I'll choose the X-spline icon over here, or S. And first I'm going to go to the silhouette preferences, and I'm going to go to the Shapes tab. And I'm going to show you that down here for my X-spline point type, I have cardinal selected. You can also choose B-spline or corner, but I have cardinal selected, and that's a tighter tension. Hit apply and OK. So when I make my shape, you can see that's a tighter tension than the B-spline. The line actually goes through the control point. So while I find that I still want corners here, what I'm going to do to make this go fast, I can Alt-Shift-A, select all the points, and make this corner. Delete the point that I don't need, and move them into place. Okay, so now we'll try the Bezier. Click on the Bezier icon over here, or Shift-B for the hotkey, and I'm just tapping down my cursor on the screen to try to make corner points. If I tap down, I click and drag, you can see the tangent handles are expanding. So the control points have two tangent handles attached that when you move them, they affect the quality of the curve on either side. So in this case, I still just would like to have corners. So I'm going to, instead of using the Alt key to cycle through the presets, I'm going to select all the points, Alt-Shift-A, and I'm going to right-click and I'm going to choose corner. And now you can see that the tangent handles are pulled all the way in, and I have corner points. I will go over to my object list, and I will turn off my demo shapes and turn on my final shapes for the boxes. So you can see when I select each one, I can hold down Shift and select all my shapes, that they look exactly the same. There are just 3 different methods to get there. Okay, now we'll start with the fern. I'll turn on my demo shapes layer, and we'll go to the top fern, and we'll select the B-spline by just choosing B, and I'll start by making my shape. I can pan around my image and keep making my shape, which is nice. So there's a couple of things to think about when you're creating your shapes. You want to think about point placement and where they would be the most helpful for you. And you want to think about line placement. So you want your points to be in areas where they'd be most effective when you are making your final shape around the object. For instance, I probably wouldn't need lots of points along this edge, but I definitely would need a couple points down at the bottom of that curve. And I can delete those ones later. And another thing to think about is where you are placing your line. Typically, an artist places the line at the edge of an object at the last solid pixel, but definitely check with your team. Okay, we're getting ready to close the shape. You see the circle, and we close our shape. And now we can start the editing process. So if I want a corner here, I can Alt-click, and we have a corner. If I need another point, I'm just going to add a point there. And as far as line placement goes as well, you want to just at least be consistent. That's probably the most important. So in the event that your shape has to be expanded or shrunken all the way around, it will be done so evenly. and you won't have any gaps. So it takes a little work to make your first initial shape, and that's a very important process because you don't want to get down the line when you're keyframing and realize that you're off here, and now you have to move your point here because you could have some chattering. So I'm going to make this a point, click Alt, and there you go. So I won't go through the entire editing process for this shape, and we'll move on to see what the X-spline is like. Zoom out. We'll go to the X-spline. We'll choose the icon there. So remember, in this case, I have my X-spline point type set to cardinal, which is a tighter tension. And you can already see that when I'm placing down the points, they're a little bit more angular. And even if I place my points either farther apart or closer together, it's still a different feeling than the B-spline. It doesn't quite feel as organic. And we'll see what it's like when I go through some of the editing. And close to the original point, we see the circle, close the shape. And as I move around and start trying to move my points to get the qualities of the curve that I want, it's a little more challenging than using the B-spline tension. And I think that's because the line goes through the control point. So I don't need maybe all these points. I can just delete a couple here. Maybe I want this to be a B-spline, so I can just cycle through B-spline tension, Alt, and I have a little more of a curve there, not so angular. So you can go ahead and go around and change the point tension as you need it. But in the end, if I feel like, well, I really think I just want all B-spline point tensions on this shape, I can Alt-Shift-A, select everything, and go down to B-spline. And now you can see that all the control points have the B-spline tension. So if you get too far down and you're actually using the X-spline with the cardinal tension or a different type of tension, you can change all the points and go from there. So that is the X-spline, and we'll go down to the Bezier. We'll choose on the Bezier icon, and we'll start making our shape. And so this is a different type of process where I'm putting my points down and I'm dragging as I go along, trying to make the curve quality good on the first outset of placing down my points. Definitely has a different feeling about when you're making your shape here. And I think I'm not as adept at using this spline type as I am the other ones. But I do know many artists who use these Bezier splines. They learned on the outset using Bezier splines, and they're just excellent at it. So that has something to do with it too. It depends on which type you ended up learning on. So we'll close our shape here, and we'll start doing some editing. So the one advantage that B-splines has is that you can, so you have the two tangent handles here. So say if I want to affect each tangent handle separately, I can. I hold down the Alt key, I choose the point, and now I can pull that down and I can move them independently of each other. So I kind of have a straight line on either side of that, but you can also have an area where, say, you wanted a curve on one side and a straight line on the other. So in this example, say I want this to be straight, or on this side, we'll move this out of the way. and or straight on that side, I should say, and maybe a little more curvy here. I can probably get rid of that point. And you have a little more flexibility there, but you can see that the editing is taking a while. And maybe for organic shapes like this, Bezier might not be the best choice because you could spend a lot of time moving the tangent handles and the control points, especially if your object is animating a lot. That might be too time consuming. So geometric shapes might be the best bet for Bezier unless they're very simple. Okay, so now I will go and I'll show you, turn off my demo shapes, and we'll show you the final fern shapes. So you can see here, I'll zoom in and I'll select both of these, that these look just exactly the same, or just about the same in number of points. And then we have the Bezier, which is a little less points. You can see here I have a couple points here on the top for that shape and some for over here. For Bezier, I can have less points, but that's probably because I have 2 tangent handles on either side of the control points. And then one last thing to note here is that this spline was created and edited with the cardinal point type tension, and it's a little more angular than the B-spline. So if you look at this shape and this shape, you can see they're a little bit different. So it's possible for really organic shapes that the cardinal point tension isn't as great. Okay, so now we'll move on to the hand. Go to our demo shapes folder, we'll turn that on. And we'll go to the B-spline once again. And this is a fairly simple shape. If I was rotoing a hand in a shot, I would probably make some more points. If I knew the fingers were moving, I would probably separate this shape into the object into many different shapes, like the fingers would be separate from the palm as well as the thumb. But in this case, we're just keeping it simple for demonstration. So this is pretty basic. I move my points into place. And that's pretty easy. I won't finish. I'll move on to the X-spline. So what I'm going to do here, in this case, I'm selecting my X-spline shape. I'm going to go to Silhouette Preferences, back to the Shapes tab. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to select the B-spline point type, apply, and hit OK. And the reason why I'm doing that is because if you're using an X-spline, you have a feature that's available to you called edge snapping. So if I have the B-spline point tension as my default, I'll make my shape and I'll show you what I mean. I'm a little bit off here. Just trying to make things go by quickly. Okay, so here I've completed my shape. So if we're using the edge snapping, I can select my points and I can click Alt-S, and you can see they're snapping into place on the edge of the shape. So that can really help speed up the process of editing. Another way to do it is you select points and you can start dragging them and then hold down Alt-S, and then it finds the edge. And that's helpful as well. It's kind of like a magnetic edge, kind of finding the edge right there. Okay, so that is a demonstration of the edge snapping. And now we'll go down and we'll try the Bezier on the hand. See if I can just use one point at the top and one of the finger and one point in between between the fingers. Close the shape and do the editing here. So maybe less points, but a lot of editing still. All right, I'll go to my final shapes here. We'll turn off the demo shapes. We'll go down to the hand. We'll turn that on. And we'll compare. We'll select each one. And you can see the B spline and the X spline look almost identical, if not identical. And then you have the Bezier with less points. All right, so that is the demonstration of the spline types. Let's take a look at the magnetic freehand tool. I use the magnetic freehand tool if I want to make detailed shapes quickly, but don't need perfect articulation. Here I have a graphic with a couple images here. I'll zoom in. I'll click on my Roto node, and I'll make a layer in my object list called Demo Shapes. When using the freehand tool, you can create a freehand shape with magnetic properties. There are two methods of creating the shape, either tracing or strokes, and in this exercise, we'll explore the tracing method. I make sure that my magnetic freehand tool is clicked over on the left side in the toolbar, and I place my point down here, and I'm tracing around the shape, placing an anchor point, and then I close my shape. I have an option up here where I can change the detail, and that is like the number of points. If I want less points, I could put in 90 or some other number, and I would have less points around my shape. But here I think this is fine. I wanted something quick, and that's what I got. So that's pretty useful. And then we'll move on to the hand here, and we'll give this a try. But before we do that, we want to make sure we select it into the reshape tool before we make a new shape. So now click back to the magnetic freehand tool, and we quickly trace around our hand here. Maybe putting down anchor point and closing up our shape. And that was pretty quick. And maybe I'll change the detail down to 95. I have less points. So there you have it. There's two quick ways to make shapes. And now we'll go over to, I have an image here, and it's a pretty large image. It's about a 6K image, and I just maybe want to change this guy or replace this guy, but I don't really want to do an articulated roto of the tree line. So I'm going to try the magnetic freehand tool. I'll click on the Roto node here. I'll make a layer called Demo Shapes. And I will select the magnetic freehand tool. And I will put down a point and start tracing my shape over the mountains. As I get closer to my subject here, I'm going to place an anchor point, and then I'm going to zoom in so I can see a little bit better. Tracing along the edge. And then I'm going to zoom out again with the minus key. And when I get to the edge of frame, I'm going to hold down my spline. And I'll close my shape. I'm going to click the reshape tool. Maybe I'll just drag this over. I'll zoom in a little bit and make a few adjustments. But remember, this is rough, so I don't need anything perfect here. I just want something quick. But this has some detail. Okay, I can zoom out, and let's take a look at the alpha channel. I'll turn off the tool overlay, and I'll cycle through the alpha overlay and the alpha channel by selecting the key A. So here we have the overlay, and here we have our mat. If I needed to, I could invert it, as you can with any spline, any shape. And there you go. So I think that was a pretty quick way to make a detailed shape. We'll turn back on our overlay. And that is the demo of the magnetic freehand tool. Okay, so let's now talk about open shapes. As you recall, in a normal rotospline shape, the line is drawn along the edge of an object and connects back to the starting point to create an outline. And the interior of that shape is the mat. And for this exercise, I have my feather handles turned on. You can see it's this line attached to the control point. So for this shape here, if the last point of the spline does not connect back to the starting point, this creates an open shape or an open spline, and the mat is basically the spline line itself. We'll turn off the overlay. I'll cycle through, and you can see what I mean. Okay, with open shapes, you can set the width or the thickness of the line used to create the mat, anywhere from a fraction of a pixel to many pixels wide, and you can even vary the thickness of each point of the spline. The minimum point requirement is 3, and you can use B-splines, X-splines, or Bezier spline types to make open shapes. And like with regular closed shapes, you can also vary the feather, which is it's like softness with a fall off. And you can have point by point variable softness with the feathering around the shape as well. So this makes open shapes really good for thinner objects with edges that have some transparency, especially hair. Okay. Here are 3 lines of different thicknesses. So rather than drawing shapes around the object, I can instead use open splines and set a width for the thickness. So we will go to the B-spline tool, and I will make 3 points. I'll click R for reshape, so I can edit my shape. And then B, make another open shape. Click R to edit the points for reshape. Click B, another shape, and click R so we can now edit this shape and select other shapes as well. So I'm going to select my first shape here, and I'm going to go down to the spline object window. So these are the different parameters I can change for each spline. I can set the stroke width to 2, and I can choose a cap style, flat or round, but in this case I'm just going to leave it at flat. And then I'm going to go to my next shape, and I'm going to select the stroke width box, and I'm going to choose 5. And then I'm going to select the last shape, and I'm going to make that 10. So I can cycle through the overlay in the alpha, and now you can see that was a really fast way to make an open shape. All right, so now we'll go down to this shape over here, and I will delete this demo shape that I made, and we'll start fresh with an open spline. I'll choose B for B-spline, and I'll make my shape down the middle. I'll click R to get into the editing mode. I'll go down to the shape object window, and I'm going to select a stroke width of 2. I'm going to choose a round cap style, and I'm going to give this a little edge blur. So the edge blur is different than the feather. So now you see I have these 2 perpendicular handles on either side of the line. So the blue is the core width, and the green is the feather. You can see the dotted line on the outside. So first I am going to change the core width. And then I'm going to change the feather, which is the dotted line. Do a little more here, maybe bring that up. And we'll cycle through. I can even change that a little more. Okay, so you can see that that was pretty easy to do. So the stroke width handles are not the same as the Bezier shape handles. These perpendicular open shape handles control the width and the feathering of the line mat, while Bezier handles adjust the shape of the line. So it's just another reason why I generally prefer to use B-splines for rotoing. I don't have to worry about the Bezier handles getting in the way. All right, so let's practice on another shape. We have this flared out shape here. I'll choose B-spline, and I'll make my shape down the center. I'll click R to get into the editing mode. And I'll go down to the stroke width box for this spline, and I will choose 5, and I'm going to keep it to flat. And maybe I'll choose a blur of 2. So I'm going to go in and start editing. I will do the core first. If I need a little more guidance, I'll turn on the overlay by clicking A. And now I can see a little easier what I'm trying to match. So I have some softness on the edge, but I also have a lot of feathering up here. We'll cycle through. So you can see you have a lot of control over the shape and the softness of the mat. Okay, so here we have an object that is a circle, and it kind of looks like an object that should be made with maybe a closed shape. But I have made this shape here, and it's actually an open shape here, but I have overlapped the end handles, the end points here, so that closed it. It looks like it's closed shape, but it's actually open. All right, so now we're going to move on to an image where we can practice on some hair shapes. All right, so here I have a subject that I need to isolate from the background. There's lots of hair detail and some blurring going on, and extraction with keying just won't quite work. So in order to get a lot of this detail up here, I'm going to use open shapes to help me out. Okay, so we'll go over to our source node. I'm going to click on my Roto node, and I've already made some shapes to help me out before I start making my open shapes. I have some for the body and the clothing, and then I have some closed shape here for the thicker pieces of hair. And I also have a shape around the head. It's kind of like a core mat where it's very opaque. So let's practice making some open shapes for the hair. I'll zoom in here. I'll choose the B key for B-spline. I'll turn on my demo shapes folder so you can see what I'm doing. I'll make my shape. When I'm done with the points, click R, and I'll move them into place. So I'll start by making the stroke width. I'll choose 2, and I will choose the blur to be 2 as well. But I'm not going to do any feathering on this shape. So now we'll try another shape. I'll choose B, and I'll put down my points. I'll click the R key so I can start editing. I'm in the reshape tool. Once I have my shape sort of where I think it needs to be, then I start adjusting the other parameters. So I'll go down to the stroke width. I'll change that to 5. And I'll change the blur to 8 because I know I'm going to need blur and feathering. So go back to my shape here, and I'm going to make this point a little tighter. I'm just going to pull that in. See if you can see that. Pull that in. Then I'll zoom out. And now I'm going to start with pulling out the core mat here. And then I'll work on the feathering. So these are for the more transparent edges along this area. If I want to get a little guidance, I can turn on the overlay and I can see, well, maybe I need a little more feathering. Maybe less core here and more feathering. We'll turn off the overlay tool here and we'll cycle through so we can kind of see our edge qualities, what they look like so far. And we can also go down to this node called a slap comp, and it's one of my favorite nodes in Silhouette, and I have them in every roto session that I work in. So I have my RGB image here, I have my roto, and then if I go down to the slap comp, I can see my image over an altered background. So it kind of gives me an idea of the progress I'm making if I'm working towards a final comp or what I'm trying to deliver. Okay, so let's take a look at the finished roto. Pull up the object list here. I'm going to turn off my demo shapes. I'm going to collapse some of these layers, and I'm going to select my hair open shapes folder here. I'm going to turn those on, and you can see that I've made many shapes. And there's no limit to the number of shapes you can have. You can have hundreds or thousands, and it doesn't slow Silhouette down. So you can see these are all open shapes, even the ones that look like a closed shape. These are all open in this folder. And everything that you see in blue is an open shape. We can cycle through the overlay and the alpha. I'll turn off the tool overlay so you can see the edge qualities here pretty well. It's nice and soft, but we still have a lot of strands for detail. And then we can also look at our slap comp. So this gives us even a better idea of what it's starting to look like. We have the RGB here, and then our slap comp there. So I can kind of see my progress of what the final composite might look like. So there you have it. Open shapes and Silhouette. Here's the Silhouette Roto compatibility chart, so you can check to see how the different spline types work with different applications. Things change frequently, so it's a good idea to test your workflow when you're starting a new project.